Manhattan Network and Public Access. Hope the book signing goes well tonight, and it's really good to meet you.
It's my pleasure, Harold, and thank you so much for
my great good pleasure through the good offices of Paul Slackus, a mutual friend, and in the audience, welcome. Welcome very much to Conversation. We're having a program now with Paul, with Robert. Ralph. I'm sorry, I got my names mixed up. With Ralph Singh. He's a spiritually inclined person involved with the Sikh tradition, and he's written a book called A Path to Follow, A Life to Lead, which is interesting. We're going to let you know about that. And Ralph, I'm sorry, my mind is worrying, but welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you so much, Harold.
I read a considerable amount on your website last night, but it was too busy this morning. It got me a little confused. I'm really happy to welcome you to the program. Ralph, could you share a little bit of your own background, where you were born and raised? And
Absolutely.
Then we'll get into the discussion of the sub and substance of your life and the books and the writing that you're doing.
Absolutely. I was born in Syracuse, New York, grew up in the small, lazy hamlet of Islip, Long Island, which 50 years ago was not what it is today, and went away to boarding school at the Gunnery in Washington, Connecticut, and then to the University of Rochester, where I found myself immersed in Japanese area studies, and then finished up at Columbia.
Okay, well, 1 minute. Back to when you were in school. Was that like a prep school?
It was,
military?
And still is. No. Frederick Gunn, one of the main activists in civil and human concerns, and the school was named after Frederick Gunn.
Okay, good. And that was like a private school.
Private boarding school in Connecticut.
A prep school, like it would be called?
Wouldn't I? You know, I'm sure your audience would agree I'm the typical prep.
Well, I think a lot of people go into interesting dimensions of life when they get out of university and all that sort of thing. And anyway, that's interesting. And then you studied at Columbia in, what did you study?
I finished up at Columbia, and my degree is from Rochester. I spent a year and a half, again in East Asian Studies and Japanese area studies.
I see.
But really, Harold, the seminal event in my life at that point was, you know, we go through a wonderful process of education in the country and in the world. But for me, and this was during the period of the student strike of 1970, and you step back.
Incredible time.
They were absolutely incredible times. And I began to look at the world. I had taken Japan as the culmination of the East, and the United States as the culmination of the West, and sort of took everything from comparative mythology and religion and economic and political systems and brought them up into World War II. I had a great time in college.
Okay.
But with all of that study, I still was trying to figure out how we as the human race got ourselves into this mess. My father was in cancer research, and I decided to go in to try and understand what I would call the human cancer.
Okay.
And despite all the other subjects, I found that really it is the religious texts which hold keys, but religion is as much the problem as the solution in terms of the way it's practiced. So my quest was, is anybody, any place in the world, actually living up to the teachings? Can I imbibe something from that in terms of personally, and also which might benefit society and the world in general? So with that in mind...
There was a lot of that around 1970, a lot of thought about philosophical moorings and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Came out of that period. Just a brief, sidebar. Your dad was a research. He was a medical person, or
he and my uncle had their own laboratory in Islip, and my father was in cancer research.
And he was a researcher and had education and all that. So the family was intellectually inclined and interested in the human
I would
condition.
say so. Yes.
Oh, okay, that's important. Anyway, you were interested in the spiritual.
And I looked at the spiritual because I felt it was a matter of changing consciousness. And consciousness, even today, that many of the scientists are still trying to figure out what it is. And so,
absolutely, huge question, yeah.
but it came before me in a very startling way. So I was sitting with a friend outside of Columbia's back gates.
What year, roughly?
We're talking the summer, August of 1970.
70 is a major year in the evolution of affairs, I'm convinced.
Is it?
Yep. As it happens.
And I share this in the book. But basically, I'm sitting and we're just having a cup of tea. And in the blink of an eye, there's this remarkable spiritual being standing in front of me with a diamond-like light shining from his head. His eyes literally held the universe. And he just held up his hand and said, "Don't be afraid."
Okay.
Because trust me, when somebody enters your consciousness, it is a very startling experience.
Okay.
He drew me out through his eyes, toured me around the heavens, made me feel like he possessed all knowledge I could ever attain.
This was a human being.
This is a being of, you know, real, I don't,
yeah.
Yeah.
The person you were having tea with saw it also?
I had never seen anything like it.
Okay.
The person sitting with me did not see it. And when I opened my eyes at the end of it, he had no understanding of what had happened. For me, it was an eternity. For him, it was a split second. Nothing.
I see.
Nothing.
Like an epiphany.
You call it what you will.
Yeah,
I still don't have words to describe it.
Right. Okay.
Trust me. After 40 years, I still don't have words to describe it.
Yeah, a major transformative event. Yeah.
But all I can say is 6 months later, I'm sitting at this person's feet in a small village outside of New Delhi, and that is how I came. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I got a picture. We have a colored picture with color of this person that is very important to you in a guru sense. Is that fair?
You see.
Okay. Don't want to.
Let me use that. It's all right.
Let them come in tight focus on this. And who is this person? And this is the visage of the person that appeared to you in that split second?
That's correct.
Okay. And who is this person, please?
His name is His Holiness Baba Virsa Singh, which is spelled out at the bottom of my book. And I just want to, for people who find it hard to understand these things, I'm going to read a little quote from a favorite of mine, and I think of yours too, which is Paul Tillich.
Paul Tillich was great. Yeah.
Which is, "It is a rare gift to meet a human being in whom love, and this means God, is so overwhelmingly manifest. It undercuts theological arrogance as well as pious isolation. It is more than justice, and it is greater than faith and hope. It is the presence of God Himself, for God is love, and in every moment of genuine love, we are dwelling in God and God in us."
Now, before you saw that visage in a split second or at Columbia in 1970, had you ever been aware of this person or ever had a book that you've seen his picture or anything?
Not only hadn't I seen him, I never had seen a Sikh in my life. I never knew there was such a religion as Sikhism, even though I thought I was studying all the religions of the world.
You were looking at Zen Buddhism and Shinto and things. But I'm Japan-oriented.
Sure, but I also understood. I studied a bit of Islam. I studied the Vedas. I studied naturally Judaism, Christianity, Shinto, the Tao, Confucian. I studied as much as I could.
But the Sikhs had not come across your consciousness yet.
Not even a mention.
They apparently have in the intervening years.
At this point, needless to say,
that's good to know.
It's readily apparent. It's readily apparent.
Yeah, it's like by the turban you shall know them, right? But anyway, that's really very good. And then you said that you ended up 6 months later in the presence of this gentleman.
I in a small little village outside of New Delhi, which still is not that well known. He had created this marvelous spiritual community.
Okay.
And I was literally led there to his feet, and when I appeared at his feet, he looked at me and he said, "You're a student." How were you led there? What was the process? On one sidebar issue, 1970, you hadn't ingested any chemicals or anything like that. Let me back up.
You weren't off on a trip with Timothy Leary.
Let me back up and say very simply, it was only green tea, Harold. There was nothing else in it.
Okay, and you didn't inhale.
No.
Okay. No, that's just a sidebar.
I didn't even snort.
I know. I didn't even snort, right? Yeah.
But I just was at Maui visiting Ram Dass, and I shared that experience with him, and we laughed. It was only
just
green
recently?
tea. Yes,
Give him my best regards. You won't remember. It used to be Alpert. He was a great guy. I did a program
Alpert.
with him way the hell back in the 70s, and he was sitting in the full lotus, and I got in the full lotus with him.
Okay.
And by the time the interview was over, he was limber as all get out, and I could hardly walk. Did the same thing with Sri Satchidananda at the St. John the Divine, you know. But anyway, that's a sidebar. But give him my best regards, Alpert. Yeah.
So the point is that Babaji has never been to school. Can't read or write.
This gentleman.
Yes. Cannot read or write in any language. Everything literally comes and came to him through revelation. And he spoke so lovingly and openly about God. And his greatest gift was whoever came to him, even if they considered themselves an atheist. He had the great gift to turn that switch on within someone and allow them to experience that presence of God within. Because frankly, Harold, if I look at the world today, and I even read religious history, if I'm a skeptical person, I might be hard put to say that there is such a thing as God. And it is only until you can meet someone who actually embodies those teachings, who actually practices them, and can inspire others around them, that it makes sense that, and then everything falls into line. All the stories from the Bible, from the life of the Buddha, everything line up.
That's interesting, and yeah, and that's the search for, in many peoples, we have Aurobindo, we have all kinds of spiritual people that have been there, and that's the search that many people have to find these, they call them gurus, in the Vedic tradition. Now the Sikh tradition is up there, I think of it as up toward Punjab somewhere, and that they wear turbans and they're unique and they're not Vedic and they're not Muslim. And I would like to get, he's of the Sikh tradition.
He is of the Sikh tradition.
And you're going to be able to fill us in. I'm very happy. I've talked to a number of cab drivers with turbans.
Yes, absolutely.
And said, we want to know more about the Sikh tradition. Where does it fit in terms of the normal canon when we think of things religious or religious movements or spiritual or states of consciousness even in terms of the human experience?
It is a distillation.
Okay.
Even though one might say that a distillation suggests a compilation, I'm not suggesting that. I'm simply saying that Guru Nanak, N-A-N-A-K, and usually when I speak I ask people to take notes and I give them a little quiz at the end, but I'll, for the sake of our listeners, I won't require that.
Okay.
But the point is that about 500 years ago, about the time Columbus was discovering America, this great spiritual being took birth in what is now southern area of Pakistan, and from childhood was greatly blessed, and there are many stories related which some may term miraculous. And he, into his early years, went into the river to take a bath.
The Indus?
No, this was just in Punjab, and just early getting up in the morning to take a bath, and did not come out for 3 days. And people felt that he had drowned and was gone, and 3 days later he comes out and says, in God's house, God doesn't see anyone as a Muslim or a Hindu. God doesn't judge people by the clothes they wear, but by their acts and by their love. And so the sense was that he, on foot, took 4 tours, for lack of a better term, from central India all the way to Mecca. Even today in Baghdad, after all the bombings, there is a shrine to where he met with the saints, the Sufis, dervishes around Baghdad and to Mecca, went up beyond the Himalayas to call the yogis down from their ivory tower and said, what's the good use of standing on your 1 foot or extending your age for 1,000 years? The world's burning. If you have any sense of conscience, come down and help the people.
He was talking to what would be like the Dalai Lama now? The
well,
people
these are
of
the
that
yogis.
Buddhist tradition in Tibet and so forth. You're talking
not
now?
necessarily, but the yogis and the Siddhs and the great sages who lived in the mountains, who would detach themselves from the world.
Yeah, right. Buddhist monks, I think of.
In that way, but these were within the Siddh or Vedic traditions.
Okay.
And then went north up into the steppes of Russia, south into Sri Lanka, and wherever he went there were great miracles, so to speak, but also teachings that, and the first word in the Scripture is not a word, it's a number.
In which scripture?
The scripture of the Sikhs is called, and I'm going to use a word which may be difficult, but it's Guru Granth Sahib. It's 1,462 pages of revelations of both the Gurus, and I'll explain that in a minute, but we have just celebrated the 300th anniversary of this coronation, for lack of a better term, of the scripture as Guru, as eternal teacher.
And where did they come from? They emanated from this person?
Well, here's what it emanated, and instead of disciples, he had there were 9 successors into which that light was passed, and they recognized it as such and called themselves, when they signed their writings, Nanak, even though their name was Guru Angad Dev, Guru Amar Das. When they signed their writings, it would be Nanak, because they recognized that the spirit was the same. But aside from their writings, they enshrined in this scripture so that no type of fundamentalism or exclusiveness would be allowed. The revelations of the great Saint Kabir, of the Ravidas, of Sheikh Farid, who was a Muslim, of an 8-year-old boy who found God, of an 80-year-old who found God, to say that God has no boundaries.
And is that included in this book?
That
it's
is
a book.
part
it's
of
like
the
we have the Bible, and we have the Quran, and then we have this other book.
And it was specifically enshrined so that there would be no, God could never be considered exclusive. That there is one God for all creation, not just people, and that people may call God by whatever names they wish, but it is the same force which is beyond everything.
Okay, it's not Zoroastrianism, it's not back to Mithra or any of those kind of traditions. It's new 500 years ago.
Correct.
How did he live? I didn't quite, you said he went into the river. And what is what's the explanation? He disappeared, or he laid in the river with his head up, breathing?
No, he was, you see, people who, I don't know how you see things, but I use the term material world for everything we can touch. And I use the term spiritual dimension for that which is right there. It said that the difference between the material world and the spiritual dimension is thinner than a butterfly's wing. And Paul spoke of through a glass darkly.
St. Paul or Paul Tillich?
St. Paul.
Spoke
of through a glass darkly, that we would be able to see face to face.
So there's been references to that with people
if we
who had
can
these.
Polish that glass of our consciousness and develop that ability to see, which was what Babaji gave people.
Okay, that is.
And I can say...
Well, this is not. This is the fellow now.
Yes.
But you're talking about the founder of it.
Even
500 years ago. Okay. And it sounds to me, if I may, when I think Vedic, I think they think consciousness comes a priori or something in the Vedic tradition, or the Eastern. East is west, west is west, and never the twain shall meet, whereas the West tends to see things materialistically moving toward the consciousness. Consciousness is a given in the Vedic tradition, so it sounds to me like he was thinking consciousness or spirituality precedes the material.
I think the point was he showed people that there is no dichotomy, and hence you do not have to leave the world to experience consciousness, to experience God. And he was very clear. And so Sikhism as teachings, and let me just digress for 1 minute. Sikh means a student.
Okay, Sikh means, I didn't know that. That's
one is a disciple, one who is a disciple of truth, who is always searching and seeking to come closer to God. That's what the term Sikh means.
And you say God and truth are synonymous.
Absolutely.
So you're seeking God.
Absolutely.
In a way, and that depends. There would have been consciousness in the traditional way of thinking. There would have been 4 million years ago, there were no human beings. They appeared 200,000 years ago. And that there was consciousness contained within Australopithecine, a hominoid line, that we were destined to come and branch off from. So there wouldn't have been that kind of consciousness of the material world that is characteristic of Homo sapiens, say, 4 million years ago.
Let me ask you something.
Okay.
If God is present everywhere,
that's the
does
premise. That's the premise. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
putting it as a conditional.
Yeah.
If God is present everywhere, which I submit to you
Is the case.
Is the case.
Okay, okay.
If that which is God is omnipresent, which is stated, if the Holy Spirit is present everywhere.
Everywhere, and that, okay. Okay, go on. Yeah.
Throughout the cosmos.
Yeah.
Should we limit it to our Homo sapiens? I talked to one of the Templeton Prize winners, Heller, who was talking about that, you know, our sun will only has enough fuel to last 5 billion years, and then what? And I said,
burn out, yeah.
5 billion, you know, so what? What,
Yeah.
you know, in other words, the concept of time is, the deeper you go in consciousness, time doesn't exist. It becomes constant.
So you've got a priori. You've got an a priori state of things, and the collider, I saw, did you see the collider went down, the one in CERN?
Really?
Yeah, they went down for a while for repairs. They went up. I'm sorry. I hope they get it back up, because they're now going to be able to take through conscious processes that the West calls conscious, materialism and so forth. They're going to be able to take the measure of the universe from the Big Bang proposed by physics 13.7 billion years ago. We got it down now to where they can take a picture and have encompass, let's say, the universe. We haven't gotten to parallel universes, but they get to that point to where it's about 200,000 years, about the same time Homo sapiens has been on this planet, writing all the books and studying and experiencing all the states of consciousness to try and understand. But they're going to have it down to within a nanosecond when they get to the boson, the Higgs boson. So that's really being able to take the measure of things in a way that is very sort of unique to the human way of seeing or consciousness that exists. That's a Western view of things.
But let me share that Babadi loved scientists, and scientists loved him.
Okay.
And he would always say there's a very slight difference between a scientist in the term a saint or a dervish or a seer. And he would laugh and say both are totally lost in their search for reality, for truth. A scientist does it by studying creation.
Yeah, and material, they will have the material world, the consciousness will emerge out of the material. And we will have other layers. Buckminster Fuller, I don't know if you were familiar, he was a big fellow, and he used to, in terms of thinking 1970, and he used to postulate, we have the second law of thermodynamics, where all systems move toward chaos. They're telling us now with string theory that there may be parallel universes to this one that we are part of. But you're saying we have an encompassing ability to understand everything in a universal pattern, and if there are parallel universes, wormholes that might be connecting them, worlds beyond that, we can now begin to put down and print and understand it in a conscious way, that would be of no importance that we're discovering that now, and not in the 10th century or the 12th century. In the 12th century, they're trying to take the measure of everything, whereas now we're a little bit more humble, that we're doing and we're learning and progressing and that sort of thing.
And Babadi would say that the dervish would simply go inside and go and meet the Creator and ask the Creator what's going on.
Okay.
And all knowledge from that perspective is within us, and our ability to tap it.
Okay,
and that is the way it is seen.
Well,
that it doesn't deny logic,
or the scientific process.
It doesn't deny it. And I've told scientists, please, I don't want you to legitimize God through science.
Okay.
And they laugh and they're very happy.
Right. Okay, they could. There's some do and everything, and they've had those traditions, and I suppose in Cro-Magnon caves back 30,000 years ago, they were trying to get a self-reflective consciousness that I don't think could have been characteristic of Australopithecine. It was an evolutionary process. It was in time, as we understand it. And they would be thinking, what is it all about? And they're trying to come up with explanations of how this universe is here, why are we here. Fuller used to say that there is the second law of thermodynamics, that all systems move toward chaos to the limit closed systems within, and that everything runs down or it goes toward entropy. And he used to say the biological evolutionary process of which humanity is a part. We're all one system, including the bacteria and everything, and we're evolving. And there's he said the biological evolution purpose of mankind is to move across entropy and bring increased conscious understanding to the broader patterns of which we are a part, including universe. We're now getting to the point where maybe we can understand universe at a conscious level, coming from the material side, in a way that is a time of qualitative transformation, the evolution of universal consciousness that he just posited as a synergistic event. Synergy is the behavior system unpredicted by the sum of its parts. We can't know that universal pattern as much as we might think we can through experience or, you know, mystic things that happen to us. We can't know that until we get there, because we're evolving to that point now. So you would take contradiction to that and say, and he would say, we don't know what that's going to be. It will be growing out of the process itself in a synergistic pattern in terms of the universal consciousness.
See, the question, and to step back, I spent a lot of time looking at philosophical arguments and things like that. Once I started to experience, you have to understand that Babadi had the ability to show people anything, literally allow them to experience. One of the things that Guru Nanak showed to the mullahs in Baghdad was he sent the sun up into the universe, into the cosmos, and showed them 14 planets with human life on them.
Okay.
And it's recorded in scripture. Now, Babadi showed that to me.
Okay.
And he showed me, he sent me, and I share that in the book, sent me on this amazing tour of the cosmos, twice as a matter of fact.
In your consciousness.
Sitting there and talking to me and giving me a guided tour.
Right. 14 planets with human life.
I'm not sure I saw all 14, but I saw many different worlds, different suns, different soils with human life, much more advanced.
Okay.
Beautifully, the technology was remarkable, and I've noted it in the diaries and put some of it in the book.
That's very interesting.
And so the point, as he said, is that let us put it this way: if there is such a thing as truth, and I'll use the Socratic model. Okay. If truth exists, truth as absolute is the not simply the subtotal of everything. It is beyond the subtotal of what we can.
Well, people would be reaching for that. That would rule out the synergy part. And that it's the behavior of systems unpredicted. You can't know the future. You can't know these things. And if you've experienced those things, Mr. Carl Sagan has been looking with SETE. We've not had any experience that we can put down in record that can be transmitted, that there are other forms of life other than this on this planet that we know. Only through the personalized, idiosyncratic experiences of consciousness within individuals that are in a certain state of mind.
Well, let me
and you can't document it.
Well, they can be documented, trust me. But let me back up for 1 minute to speak about SETI, which I'm very interested in, all these things. But if at one point a light is coming to me and I put up my hands in front of my face, I'm not going to do that for the sake of the cameras.
Okay, it's such a handsome
like
face.
That.
It's such a handsome face.
My face is not going to be perceived. What Babadi said is we human beings have such a reputation as a poisonous society, and in terms of what we have done to each other and continue to the environment, that those more advanced people, let's use the term people, don't want us to find them yet.
Because we're not ready.
Yeah, because
exactly, I can understand.
And they have protected them. You know, they don't want our probes.
That's
to
what a lot of people who think of the UFOs, who have flying saucers, and they have to do it slowly because. And Emily Dickinson wrote a great poem, "Dazzle Gradually," and things have to mature in their own time, and that if the supreme beauty was to be made available immediate all at one time within the context of which we and you are. We're talking in the year 2008.
Yeah.
And we were doing that, all men would be blind. It would be blinding. They can't have that.
Yeah.
So it takes time. They have to be able to do it. But we may be getting to that point where there's going to be a jump or a quantum leap in terms of consciousness as is normally understood by scientific Western understanding.
I'm going to bring it back to very basic level.
Okay.
Because Babaji always said that God is very simple. God is beyond, in other words, that it's not a very highfalutin philosophy. It's something which everybody, even the uneducated, can understand. And that was his greatness.
Okay,
that
good,
he had remarkable knowledge, remarkable experience,
Right.
and yet he could share that with people who knew nothing of science
Like Ralph.
or technology, like me.
Yes.
Definitely like
You're a
me.
student, he said, as you got to
Absolutely.
that's wonderful. And I'm sorry, I'm just randoming off Fuller
But
and that
it's
kind of stuff
fun.
and everything. I understand it, and the Sikh is very good. And one of the problems, we've got 58 minutes, we could talk for hours on
Yep.
these kind of subjects and so forth. But one of the things is you brought in some tape, or we have
Right.
some tape, and it might be that it will help introduce this gentleman. And so this person has been such an inspiration to you. And so do you think maybe we could try to think about setting that up and running it first?
And let me introduce
Okay.
it in saying this way.
Please.
That despite these remarkable spiritual experiences that he allowed me to actually have, despite the remarkable knowledge that he had, when I came, he was out in the field plowing behind a bull.
Okay.
He insisted, his work ethic was second to none. He insisted that people work and provide not just for themselves but for the poor. He developed vast acreages of land to create an economic base for the poor. And that is a little bit because he doesn't feel that poverty should exist. And that out of consciousness is not simply an esoteric state of mind. Consciousness is social conscience and social responsibility.
Very good.
So that if there is a sense that we are bound together under one, if we use the term, if there is God as one, it is a unifying force within society. It obligates us to see ourselves as responsible for all creation.
Absolutely. All of our wisdom teachers have been telling us this since the beginning of time, almost from Buddha, from Christ, to Muhammad. All these have been telling, and it's been roundly ignored by the political leaders by and large. And there's a need for to have transformation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And so this film will show you how he was chosen, along with Mother Teresa, to be the two people to sit on the dais at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, to show the two people in the world who are most demonstrating how God's power impacts people.
Wonderful.
And this
when was that? When
for
was
it.
that?
That was 1980. I've forgotten when
Yeah,
it
right,
was.
right. Yeah. So he
whatever.
is somebody who is of great spiritual significance we should pay attention to. So, Ralph, thank you. And maybe we could set up that piece of DVD footage, and then we may or may not be talking over it. But we're talking with Ralph Singh, and he's a beautiful fellow, and he understands the Sikh tradition, and is a devotee of this gentleman, this spiritual leader, and we're going to run a piece of videotape about him now. Then, run that tape now, then, please, if you could. There. I don't know whether. Oh, is that it? Okay.
In 1968, Baba Virsa Singh and a handful of devotees from different backgrounds and traditions started Gobind Sadan with 17 acres of rocky land on the outskirts of New Delhi, India. Through Gobind Sadan, Babaji has demonstrated how God's love overcomes poverty which plagues our world and transforms conflict into peace. Here is His Holiness Baba Virsa Singh sharing his vision.
एक खजाना है हर चीज का
See, I see the earth, land, as a treasure house of many, many resources that go undeveloped.
ਇਹਨੂੰ ਪੂਰਾ ਡਿਵੈਲਪ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਏ ਤੇ ਕੋਈ ਬੰਦਾ ਗਰੀਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿ ਸਕਦਾ.
If we really developed the land that's available, then there really should not be any poor person left in the world. As long as anyone could remember, this was an alkaline wasteland, land so useless that even in the midst of abject poverty, no one wanted to cultivate it. Condemned by the government as worthless, it lay under 15 feet of water several months of the year. No roads, no electricity, no schools, no medical facilities, no fresh water. The people too were condemned to a life of stealing and mugging. Until Baba Virsa Singh of Gobind Sadan made a commitment to develop the land to demonstrate that God's light exists even in the midst of darkness.
कि हे परमात्मा ये धरती भी तेरी है ये बंदे भी तेरे ने वर्क भी तेरा है ते प्यार भी तेरा है.
And we prayed before God that, Lord, the land is yours, the people are yours, the love is yours, and everything we do is to your honor, and it's really your mission that we are setting foot on.
फिर वर्क शुरू करती.
And we began.
तो जब थोड़े जे लोग चंगे इकट्ठे हो जाते ने.
It just takes a few good people to come together before we can see a tremendous improvement in any nation.
किसी भैन भरा असी इंसान.
If we were to look at each other as all brothers and sisters, understand that we're all of one human race, and begin to work together, then not only would God be very happy with us, we all would find tremendous happiness, and we'd be able to work to alleviate poverty in the world. What use is saying that we love God and yet we sit idle and not attack the problems? God will empower those who are willing to work for his mission. And with God's love and hard work, even the most barren land would bear fruit, and the people we cast out would become productive. But we've been able to raise record crops on that land which had been previously condemned. But why? Because it was God's love and the work that people put in, and the love that the people shared. And we set to work. And you wouldn't believe the bounty that was produced by those crops. And not only were the crops bountiful, the income was unbelievable. And through that income, the poverty in the area began to be eradicated. And I say that because it was our first commitment that we were not doing this to earn anything for ourselves, but rather all the income was slated to begin with to eradicate the poverty in the area. Because there is only one power in the entire universe that can fill us with its love, that can provide us the compassion out of which we look to serve humanity, and that is God's love. We never took any help from the government in any of our projects. Because in God's house, That service is most acceptable if we do it with our own
They're
hands.
still rolling the sound, and then they can cut it off, or they're coming back. You should come back to us and if you can, Willie. Okay, that's beautiful, and showing that there was a will of God, a good work, and doing good works, and brought the earth for and got over poverty. That was very interesting. Yeah.
Well, see, that was the point. That
Yeah.
we can. I love, as you might see, I rise to the occasion when
Yes.
someone wants to talk about things in any level.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, how does it impact the world?
Mm-hmm.
And that is what Sikhism, that is what Guru Nanak taught. That is the tradition.
Guru
and that-
Nanak,
Guru
is
Nanak.
Uh-huh.
And that is what Babaji actually demonstrated.
And he's
that
okay. Go ahead. Yeah,
let us do that.
Okay.
So the principles are pretty simple.
Uh-huh.
Love God, doesn't matter how you see God. Remember God, thank God. It's a contemplative tradition.
Okay.
Everything grows out of meditation, out of contemplative on God's holy name and all. I think the concept of God's holy name, it translates across traditions. I'm doing a little piece on that. But then work hard. Second point, work hard. It doesn't matter what you do. There is no profession which is, as long as it's honest, there's no profession that soils your hands. Get your hands dirty. Your character shouldn't be soiled. You can make as much money as you want. That's not the point. Free enterprise from that perspective, but do it honestly. And then share with those in need. 3 basic points.
Those are I think most of our spiritual or our wisdom schools have said, take care for the least among you. They've all said that.
Absolutely.
They've all brought that down. And as I said earlier on, it's been ignored through the history of mankind by the political leadership.
Correct.
Whether it was the emperors in Rome or the kings in Europe or the bankers now that are violating the earth and doing things. And so those ideas are there from our spiritual traditions, but they're ignored by the people who are operating the planet and have principal responsibility for the major institutions, don't you think?
And that's what Babaji would do. He'd grab them all by the scruff of their neck because of his position, quote unquote, and he was not ordained in a worldly sense, but all prime minister level would come and sit at his feet. Leaders of the various religious communities would come and sit at his feet.
We just had 8 years of an administration politically in the United States run by George Bush.
He wrote him a letter.
He would not sit at his feet. He would go and invade Iraq and do a war that is draining the treasury and go on a different course. And wouldn't listen to our wisdom schools. That's the point.
And he didn't. Babaji wrote him a very stern letter.
Yes. Did he get
after September 11th? No. And he told him that you are the unchallenged leader of the world. You act as a father to the world. Do not take stern action, and do not make this mistake. Otherwise, all countries will leave you, and America will become poor.
Yeah.
These were his words.
And it looks like they were prophetic.
Very much
because
so.
we could be heading now, as you understand, you and I have some years behind us and everything, long enough to remember, or long enough back in time to remember the deflationary depression of the 1920s in this country, or 30s in this country, and we may be heading for that again because the political leadership has not listened to those in the wisdom school that are talking about let's be good to one another.
And that I believe. And the other thing, but Babaji always spoke of great hope. Despite the negativity, he always said that the darkness is simply a stage for the light to play upon. And don't spend so much time battling against the darkness that you forget to create light. And so his focus was always certainly challenging the leadership to do good, saying that it is the responsibility of a good leader to be a leader for everyone.
All right.
And he was, in one sense, the one person who was looked to who could integrate what some people call traditional values into modern development and show how they could be integrated. And as you can see, he wasn't simply plowing by hand anymore. He had 16 tractors going.
I thought about the blooming of the Imperial Valley in California when water gets to it.
Right.
And that was a steel plow I saw. There was a lot of technology developed in the West. And in that slower process, we couldn't plow Illinois, the best soil in the world, in the early 19th century, until we invented steel. So it's a process of building through time and everything, where you can bring the technology is what's creating the wealth, not even the hard work.
And he felt all technology is God's gift. And it's our consciousness. How do we use it?
Could I ask you a conundrum question?
Of course.
Technology there's an extension of consciousness. From the Western tradition, that's an extension of consciousness into the environment, where you can create an environment other than, like in an Eden-like sense, the creatures mostly confront the environment. When we first emerged out of evolution, we were embedded in nature, and then we could extend our consciousness disproportionately sensorially and create technology that could make the world different than in an Eden-like sense was given. And that technology has reached a point now, from what I understand, I wonder if you studied it along these lines, that most of that research that's been led in the political realm of realpolitik has been at the service of weaponry. And they've developed weaponry now that apparently is technology, God's work, I don't know. It's got this thing that's extended out, that if it was to be unleashed in a spasm of hatred like we saw at Bhopal last week, or not Bhopal, Bombay last week, and so forth, with tremendously hate on both sides and so forth, not to mention Palestine, Iraq, other places and so forth. If it was to be unleashed in a spasm of hatred, as humanity is expressed throughout the whole human experience, apparently, I'm not absolutely sure it's true, can't be tested, it would mean the end of the whole human species and the evolutionary process which we try to give words to what's been going on in this universe. Is that part of God's work, the weaponry that will kill us all?
I think that's a great question.
And is this something we have to accept as part of the reality, rather than that there's that we're sure everything's going to be okay because God's there?
Okay, let's back up.
Okay.
Let's back up. I don't want to break it down into too many building blocks, but let's start with one thing.
Okay.
If we speak of that which is God, there is then everything, all of creation, good and bad, exists under that order.
Well, that's
in that one sense. However,
but God is good, and God is love and truth.
God wants, let's put it this way, if there were a producer and the director and the scenery and the one who made everything, God is not, by definition, at least mine and the Sikhs and Vedic and
most all of the religious traditions.
God the Father doesn't come in birth. God is beyond time, space,
I
continuum.
understand. Yeah, that's what they assume.
And so now we say, all right, you used a very important word, which is hatred. Hatred is counter to God.
Of course.
No.
Because God is also the atomic bomb that kills people. That's God, because He's everything.
Let me put it this way.
Okay.
There are two levels that we can look at things.
Good and bad?
No. On one level where we say God is everything, and everything at that level is of God. No, is God. In other words, God created both good and evil. But what is God's law? What does God want, quote unquote? What has God taught through His messengers is to use consciousness for good and for...
That's an assumption. That's a huge assumption. And it may be, Fuller at least, if I may, being Western, he said that there's a movement across entropy to bring increased conscious understanding of the process of which we are a part. We were Homo sapien for 200,000 years.
Right.
We may get to a point where we will have a relationship to the broader cosmos at a level of consciousness that we cannot know coming out of history. We can't know the nature of universe or ultimate answers, no matter how much spiritual people try to put a template on reality in that way, because it gives a sense of purpose and that kind of thing. And we've used those spiritual traditions throughout history. But it may be that this planet, this little planet, is meant to entropy. It may be that we're meant to destroy, and that we will, and others have. So we can't just assume that we know the whole universe and that we have to do it here from within what the evolutionary pattern that we can understand in normal scientific terms, and we have to get it right, and we haven't got it right yet.
Let me back up.
Okay.
And say, I had the privilege of translating for some Lebanese Druze in an audience to Babaji. One of my greatest privileges was sitting at his feet translating for many groups who came to him.
Okay.
Scientists from the Soviet Academy of Scientists, from America, from ecologists.
Translating from what to what?
Punjabi, which is what he spoke, to English.
You can do Punjabi?
I do my best.
Okay, good. Yeah, I understand.
And in that conversation, one of the greatest questions was, will the world ever end? It's a mess.
Well, it will definitely end at some time.
Well, that's, yes, I mean in terms of,
Billions
but will
of
we
years,
destroy it, in other words?
Well, yeah, that's the question, because we have that in our hands, which we haven't had until about 1970, when you had that encounter. That's when the weapon systems became species lethal.
And Babaji said that God promised Noah that at that time, after the flood, that he would never destroy all humanity again. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we can't, and we aren't going around doing a pretty good job of messing up the world.
And that we may be meant to entropy.
No,
that has to be one within a synergy. Synergy is the behavior systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. You have an unpredicted. We'll reach a point, punctuated equilibrium, or a new state of consciousness transcendent to human consciousness that we have all been in for 200,000 years. And if we get to that point where we have that liberated context for that context, then we may be synergistically a resonancy interaccommodated to universe at another level. But we can't know that from inside the womb.
Okay, let me share an incident. If you want to get involved in interfaith dialogue and all different stuff, just put a turban on your head and walk out.
That'll bring it right on, right?
Right immediately.
Right. No, and the Sikh tradition is really interesting. I'm happy.
Talk about
I'm sorry,
turban.
I'm just doing all this
stuff. It's quite all right, but let me.
Mm-hmm.
I was coming back from India through Amsterdam. I think I was flying Northwest or KLM. Probably 5-6 years ago, when some advanced troop movement was coming out and coming in Syracuse, Fort Drum is headquarters to some of the people who've been there for quite a while, and some of their officers were on that plane coming out to make to get preparations. And the man I was sitting next to was a wonderful man, and he used to put a Bible quote on his tent every day, and everybody loved it. And he said to me, you know, we all feel the weight and the amazing privilege of being fighting on the soil which is the birthplace of civilization from our perspective. And he said, and then he became very somber, and he said, but we all feel we're fighting the battle to end civilization.
That's what they said about
and you know
the First World War.
You know what Babaji said?
What did he say?
Internally, he spurs me. And he said, tell him, if it's civilization as we know it, let it end. And I said to him, look, precisely. I said, if it's civilization as we know it, the injustice and the inequality of women and the way we treat everybody,
chattel
and
slavery
the corruption and everything, let it go. Let it go. But civilization will not end. We will be able to create a great civilization which has been promised by all those who came in God's
and all
name.
those wisdom schools.
But see, the point is
we have
that
to
what
listen
do we
to
do?
those, don't we? We should listen to the wisdom schools more than just the political.
But that's the point. I think the point is, I wrote a little piece called "Blaming God." That if this were the old days, we'd all be in sackcloth.
You're ready for the comedy channel, right?
Well, I'd love it.
Yeah.
But we're and instead of our trying to live up to it, we'd rather blame God that He's allowing this to happen. Where's our sense? And
the Germans had in the First War, God. Everybody has God mit uns. And they go all. You know, it's just like a God. If there is a God, I'm not at all sure. I'm so ready to accept that. If there is, He would have to be laughing and uproarious at the folly of the human condition as we go now. We have an incredible capability of providing for everybody and the ecology and everything, and we're the odds are that we're going to blow the whole thing up.
Well,
we're going to allow the whole thing to blow up because we don't listen to our spiritual leaders or our intellectual leaders. We listen to people who are mired in James Joyce said, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken. And we listen to political leaders all caught up within outdated systems in terms of the technological involvement. We have a liberating capability since about 1970. We have weapon systems that can destroy the whole species since about 1970, and they're still going down the same old path with the old
Why?
ideas out of history.
Because everybody looks to power.
Yeah, right.
And we have lost, even our religious leaders. You look at the brothers Karamazov,
Yes.
at the Grand Inquisitor
Yes.
sequence, where Jesus comes back at the time of the Inquisition and starts healing people, and the Grand Inquisitor puts a collar on him.
Yeah.
And he said that you told people they can live by bread alone, but all you gave us is bread.
Yes.
We've lost our spiritual connection.
Yeah.
I say in the book that not only do we sever a physical umbilical cord, when a child is born into these societies, we sever their spiritual umbilical cord.
Yeah.
And we have lost the ability to listen to that voice.
And we should be listening to those voices.
And the voice comes within everybody. It's decentralized power.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry to have been a devil's advocate and all that, but I just am a little bit dismayed with the way things are going, although I'm happy. Maybe we got a new thing going with a new president. Something can happen differently in the political world. And you're giving a talk tonight,
I give a talk tonight, and
good.
one thing I'll talk about
that is December 5.
December 5th, book signing at the East-West bookstore. But
Good.
one thing I'll talk about is the power of forgiveness, which needs to, and reconciliation. You know, this turban it's a turban for peace.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the Sikhs are
stands
wonderful people. Everyone I've run into is an absolutely human being of the highest order.
Do you
I
know
want to say
it
that.
stands for truth?
Okay, good.
It stands for justice. It stands for the universal values which we ascribe to, which is to defend everyone's right to pray publicly or in private according to their own belief without fear of persecution.
Okay.
It stands for the downtrodden, for the poor, for the oppressed,
We
for
sure
those
need
with
that, don't we?
disabilities.
Yeah.
Who have been marginalized to feel part of community again.
Right,
One thing that Guru Nanak said, and that we try, that Babaji is, don't see anybody as an outsider. Don't see
Yeah, we're
anybody.
all in this boat together.
Correct.
When we can destroy the whole species, you can't just go off and oppress the other tribe and steal their grain for your tribe. Geopolitics.
Correct.
Because it's all of us in the boat.
Exactly.
So we have a commonality, and we got to find the roots that can liberate the humans, particularly the people that are most oppressed, which is the vast majority of humanity. We have to find a way of doing that, and if we find our way to that, there will be a kind of resonancy that would be, we're going to have to liberate the human society rather than annihilate it.
That's
and we're
very
at
well
that
put.
point now, after 200,000 years, it makes this particular time particularly crucial, it seems to me.
Well, I think people will start to listen.
I hope
and
so.
I think, too, that we had a seminal event after September 11th. Four kids torched our place of worship because they thought the turban.
See, that's the hatred toward. Yeah, the enemy. It used to be the Jews under the Nazis. They did that awful stuff and all that. Now the de jure is the Arabs,
Right.
or anything that looks Muslim,
Right.
And that's the enemy de jure. And so we go on like out of history. We got to get past all
And
that.
how we got past it is Babaji sent and issued a very powerful statement of forgiveness.
Okay.
We immediately went public and said, when people asked, are you going to rebuild? We said, this provides us an opportunity to rebuild the broader community.
Good.
Based on love and understanding.
Okay.
So this kind of hatred and ignorance doesn't occur.
Preaching love and understanding again, are you?
It's terrible.
Terrible. You
Slap
get to
my
the
wrist.